Welcome to Nightmares and Grief, a place to explore and celebrate the darkness. Today's episode is part 8 of my novel, To Make the World Obey. Previously, Bartu killed a cellmate with his bare hands. Officer Kennedy used it as an excuse to isolate him, but Kennedy had his own score to settle. His sister was still in a coma from the Fred Meyer massacre. He beat Bartu with a nightstick until other officers dragged him off. Bartu was moved to the hospital in critical condition. Across town, Temujin answered a challenge to his leadership by snapping a man's spine over his knee. He told the clan their next mission: Bartu must die. They would raid the police station, but when they got there, Bartu was already gone. Johnny rallied a crew of killers to hit the hospital instead. He shot one of his own men dead just to make a point that questions weren't welcome. Meanwhile, Deborah went back to the station. She walked into a war zone. Temujin's clan stormed the building, and Deborah, Freddy, and Hartigan held them off in a firefight, outgunned and running out of bullets. Temujin slipped out the back with a prisoner who'd shared a cell with Bartu. 3 factions are closing in on one target. Who gets there first? Find out on To Make the World Obey. Now, settle in, check under the bed, and pour a drink for the skeletons in your closet. It's time to start. Deborah, December 15th, 2024.
This is fuck, Deb! They were outnumbered and outgunned, and somehow the barbarians managed to lift the keys to the holding cells, another price paid that made Deborah's blood boil even hotter. The pandemonium provided an opening for escape, and she wasn't sure how many of the dead escapees were their fault. The plan was falling apart. Beside her, his back pressed against their decaying concrete barricade, Hartigan grimaced and reloaded his Glock. He didn't comment on Freddy's observation. He slammed the clip into the gun, pulled the slide, and opened fire again. Hartigan had the right attitude. Deborah shouted back at Freddy, "The only way to unfuck it is to do what the commissioner is doing." She pushed forward, jumping out of cover while the majority of the men with the rifles down the hall reloaded their guns. Freddy cursed, and Hartigan spat a command at him, and Freddy clenched his jaw, reloaded his gun, and kept firing. Deborah made it to the other side of the hallway and gained about 10 feet, ducking behind a small outcropping of wall. Her index finger ached all the way up to her elbow. Teeth clenched. She fired until the countdown in her head reached 0, and then she ejected the clip, reloaded, and started again. She was running out of bullets, but if she was running out of bullets, they would have to be too. Deborah glanced across the hall to catch Hartigan's gaze. Deep lines cut crevices into his forehead, and his lips pulled down into a hard, tight scowl. Hartigan was running out of bullets, too. Deborah checked her watch. Where the fuck was backup? The countdown in her head went 3, 2, 1. She dropped back behind the little alcove, released the clip, reached her hand into her pockets, and no more bullets. Freddy had already caught her frantic gaze before Deborah had a chance to fling it toward him. His grimace deepened, and in her gut, Deborah knew that wartime Freddy was going to do something foolish if she didn't do something soon. She took a deep breath. She could take care of herself. She wasn't so sure that Freddy could. His face loosened and his jaw dropped, and Deborah knew that he had realized what was on her mind. So when she jumped into the line of fire and weaved down the hall, she pumped her legs even faster than she thought she could. There was so much adrenaline in her body that, although she was vaguely aware of the pain, she was incapable of localizing it. She ignored it. When she sprang into the air, her face a contorted knot of lines and her throat full of fury, Deborah couldn't help but savor the shock of pleasure rippling down her spine as the expression of every one of the raiders dropped into either confusion or terror. She collided with one of them, screaming like a feral animal, lashing against him with random, bare-handed violence. Horrible sounds came from the figure beneath her. Her hands were wet and hot and sticky, and she never knew she was capable of so much with so little. The gunfire all ceased, and she hoped the distraction wasn't a waste and that Freddy and Hartigan were escaping while the raiders were busy pulling her off the now limp figure she'd launched herself upon. Her back was to the front entrance, where she heard shouting and the clatter of cocking rifles. But the star of pain erupted at the base of her skull, and everything went black.
Johnny, December 15th, 2024.
They had to load all the friends into 3 cars. For the piece of shit they were picking up, they brought a Ford Transit. Johnny rode shotgun in the big Cadillac leading the convoy, and when it pulled up to the hospital, he turned to the driver. "Under no circumstances are you to move this car without me, or your life will not be worth shit." The driver was a young son, and he nodded a little too frantically. Johnny clapped him on the shoulder a few times, then patted his jacket to feel the Desert Eagle, and then opened the door. This signaled the other doors to open, and a gaggle of gangsters streamed out of the cars and toward the hospital entrance. They hustled, but they didn't run. Their movements were just controlled enough, like a school of fish, to seem strange. Each of them wore a scowl or sneer, promising danger if they were stopped. The receptionist didn't bother. They seemed to know where they were going, and she let them pass by. Cosmo caught up with Johnny at the front and muttered, "This is fucking insane, kid." Johnny pressed the up button on the elevator and shot his cuffs. "I know. Shut up." The elevator doors slid open, and the nurses inside stopped in mid-sentence, startled by the electricity crackling around the threshold. "You gonna get off, or you gonna take a fucking picture?" The nurses averted their gaze and slipped by. Johnny and the rest of the men filled the elevator. A pregnant woman approached, and Cosmo glared at her, daring her to share the space with them. She stepped back and looked away, too. The doors closed, and the elevator lurched into motion. "You know what the fuck you're doing, kid?" The question floated on genuine concern, but anger flashed under Johnny's collar, and he snapped a glare at the old man like a striking cobra. What a fucking time to get cold feet. "Just stick to the plan, asshole." The doors slid open, and out rolled the men, moving down the corridor like a hateful tide. There were 2 officers stationed outside the room, and one of them spoke into her walkie-talkie, concern wreathing her face. They were so thoroughly engrossed in their worry that when Johnny pressed his gun against one of the officers' temple, he must have appeared like a phantom. The cop's whole body flinched, and she dropped her walkie with a loud clatter. Lucardo pressed his pistol against the other officer's forehead, even though his hands were already raised. Johnny said, "You're gonna get down on the floor. Do you understand? The officer closed her eyes and nodded. As she slid onto her belly, he snarled at the other officer. You think you're special, Princess Fuckface? Do what she's doing. Let's fucking go. The officer's Adam's apple bobbed, and he nodded. He did as he was told. One of the younger sons took their guns and took Johnny's place, pressing the Glock into the back of the cop's head while Johnny entered the room. Holy shit. Cosmo's contact hadn't been kidding. They'd really fucked the guy up. His face looked like a 3-year-old had tried to help roll meatballs for dinner, and 3 of his limbs were covered in bright white casts. The doctor, standing beside his bed, turned at the sound of the door and dropped his clipboard when he saw the gun pointed at his face. Cosmo and his friends were close behind. All of them brandished pistols. Johnny grabbed the back of the doctor's collar and pressed the barrel of the Desert Eagle into his jaw. What's your name, Doc?
Murphy.
Dr. Murphy.
Yeah.
Give me the skinny on this asshole. Dr. Murphy looked at Johnny like he was speaking Aramaic. Johnny dug the barrel deeper into the soft part of the jaw and made an insistent growling sound.
Okay. He's in bad shape.
You sure you're not Dr. Obvious? What the fuck kind of answer is that?
Jesus Christ, what do you want? Look at him. He's got 8 broken bones, some internal bleeding, severe bruising. You've got to be more specific when you ask that question.
Johnny bared his teeth and dug the pistol deeper into the man's jaw. His eyes burned. You're talking like all your schooling makes you bulletproof. You want to test that theory? Murphy's mouth opened and closed wordlessly. Didn't fucking think so. Here's your specific fucking inquiry. I want to move him. Dr. Murphy shook his head.
There's no way. There's no way. His condition is stable, but we just managed to get him to that point. You move him, you risk upsetting his condition, and...
Johnny shook his head. He ain't connected to any machines, Doc. I don't think you're being too honest.
There's too much risk. What the hell are you even trying to do?
You hear that, kid? Cosmo interjected. The guy's pretty fucked up. Johnny bobbed his head. Yeah, I heard he needs a doctor. Dr. Murphy gave Johnny an incredulous look.
That's why he's here, genius.
Yeah, well, we need to get him somewhere else, so I guess you're making house calls now, Doc. The incredulity transformed into horror. The doctor's mouth flapped open and closed as he babbled, searching for words with which to make his case. Johnny shushed him. Shh. We don't have time for any of that shit, Doc. Either you come with us nice or you come with us unconscious. You fucking choose. Murphy closed his eyes and hung his head. His shoulders trembled and he put his hands up, clearly defeated. Cosmo patted him on the back. Good choice, Doc. That was the right decision.
There's police outside, Murphy murmured. You'll never make it.
As if on cue, one of the sons who'd been keeping watch in the hall popped his head into the room.
Hey, boss, you'll never believe it. Some lunatics are attacking the police station.
Noticing their surprise, he nodded.
Yeah, I heard it on the cops' walkies.
Dr. Murphy gaped at Johnny, who just shrugged and shook his head. Cosmo said, What, you think we're the only ones who got beef with the cops? Taking hold of the doctor's arm, Johnny led him to the door. The other friends who'd entered the room with him crowded around Bartu's bed and maneuvered it toward the door. Stick with us. It's probably safer, Doc. You never know what kind of crazy people are out there. At least you know we'll keep you alive.
How do I know that? Because I fucking said so. You think I'd lie to you? Now where's the elevator that's big enough for this guy's gurney?
Although it took the suggestion of further duress to make him cooperate, Dr. Murphy led the group to the service elevator with the unconscious Bartu in tow. While they all descended, Johnny caught himself wondering how it could be so easy. They'd locked the two cops to each other, back to back with their own handcuffs, taking their radios and their guns.
What's the deal, Kaz?
Cosmo shook his head in response.
I don't know, kid. I was thinking the same thing.
The doctor interrupted.
They're gonna get you. It's just a matter of time before they come.
The same son who'd announced the attack on the police station sent an open palm across the back of Dr. Murphy's head.
Shut the fuck up about things you don't know shit about. Nobody's coming. Got it? They're too busy trying to save themselves from this guy's buddies.
Murphy's eyes seemed like they'd erupt, and his mouth hung open just enough to lend him a dumbfounded expression.
What?
The elevator doors slid open, and Johnny urged him forward with a jab of the eagle's barrel. He led the way, one hand clenched over the doctor's shoulder while he guided his direction with a gun. This is it, Johnny thought. This is the part where the showdown happens. In the parking lot, they're fucking waiting for us. It had been too easy. There was no way they were going to just let them walk out. But as they moved through the corridors, it was precisely that easy. The handful of rent-a-cops they came across stepped away and threw their hands into the air the moment the guns pointed in their direction. Dr. Murphy pleaded with them. He pleaded with everyone they passed, whether they were patient, doctor, security guard, or other, but they were deaf to his cries. The doctor seemed bewildered that anyone could stand witness to an armed kidnapping. It amused the hell out of Johnny. He imagined the doctor wondering, aren't I important enough for someone to save me? We're all just meat and shit, Doc. Nothing special about meat and shit. They passed through the reception area into the front of the hospital. Johnny blew the secretary a kiss and grinned at her. Impossibly, she blushed. They passed through the automatic sliding doors, pushing the unconscious Bartu right along with them. No guns were waiting for them. No armored SWAT vans with armored thugs wielding heavy black assault rifles. The getaway car waited for them, and they loaded their human cargo in the back of the transit. It went off without a hitch, and Cosmo said as much once they got back into the Cadillac. Everyone was whooping and cheering and slapping each other on the shoulders and backs in celebration. I can't fucking believe it, Johnny said. Me fucking neither, kid. Can you believe the fucking luck? They knocked over the wrong place. They knocked over the wrong fucking place, kid! They drove away, laughing and joking and recounting the whole thing. The entire time, not a single siren was heard. The convoy separated on the highway. The Cadillac, with Cosmo, Liccardo, Johnny, and Dr. Murphy, headed away from the city and was followed by the van carrying Bartu. The boys in the other cars went into the city for drinks and stories and girls. The night was still young. Johnny's work had only just begun. It was going to be a long night.
Freddy, December 15th, 2024.
The raid had been a stroke of good luck for the gangsters, but the department was in shambles. Too few officers had come too late, and the ones who had come or who were already there were now dead or wounded. The walls were adorned with wide red webs and polka dot sprays. Bullet holes pockmarked the stains, and the holding area stank with the wet smell of blood. It was mostly quiet. The dead do not make much noise. The raiders were gone for the most part, having retreated the way of their leader. All that was left were their wounded. There were 6, and they squirmed and groaned, and some of them wept and screamed, clutching bloodied limbs. Freddy took a pistol off a dead man and checked it for bullets, and then he went to each of the 6 survivors. He asked them, "Where did they take the woman?" The first man lay propped up against the wall. He clutched his gut with a slick hand, quaking against labored breathing. Freddy asked him the question, and the man spat blood in his face. But Freddy didn't even flinch. He'd anticipated the reaction and had, on some level, hoped for it. Without a moment of hesitation, he raised the gun and shot the man in the head. He went to the next man. This one groaned in pain, his face twitching with the pulse of agony. Busy with his whining, he took too long to answer, so Freddy shot him too. The third man answered before the question was even posed.
There's a big abandoned warehouse on the south side of town,
he sputtered, but he couldn't speak fast enough. The words stumbled over each other like panicked people in a crowded, burning theater. Freddy raised the gun to the raider's face. He wore a cold, bland mask. The raider could not read his expression. Hardigan had seen it before, but not on Freddy. It made him shudder. Freddy said nothing to the man. The pistol snickered when he pulled the hammer back, and the man took that to mean he was to continue.
It's on Pine Street. The address is...
He squeezed his eyes shut and babbled nonsense. He opened them again, and the gun was pressed between his eyes. His jaw dropped.
3918. 3918. That's it. I remember it now. It's 3918. Please, mister, please don't fucking shoot me.
Were you at the Fred Meyer massacre? Freddy asked, his voice scraping across the air like sandpaper.
No. I wasn't chosen for that. I stayed at the warehouse. Everyone stays at the warehouse unless they're out on a raid or recruiting.
Recruiting?
Temujin's building an army.
Freddy averted his face and looked at the man sidelong, cocking a quizzical eyebrow. An army? The man nodded furiously. How big is this army?
Maybe 50, 60 guys.
Freddy sucked on his tongue. Not an army, so much as a cult. Still, 60 lunatics with assault rifles was nothing to bat an eye at. The grocery store raid was put into perspective now. It made sense. This Temujin, was supplying his cult through his raids. Who the fuck is Temujin? Freddy asked. The man blinked a few times as if he were struggling to comprehend the nature of the question. His face suggested that the answer was obvious, or perhaps that it was impossible to answer.
Temujin's the leader. He's our leader.
Freddy shook his head.
Yeah, I gathered that. Who is Temujin?
The emphasis didn't seem to clarify the question, although it was simple. The question was impenetrable. The emphasis didn't seem to clarify the question. Although it was simple, the question itself was impenetrable.
Temujin is Temujin, man, the cultist finally said. He's a big guy, and he's crazy, and he's scary, and he's a genius. Something is missing in men, and he sees it. He puts it back inside of us. He's fixing us.
The answer seemed as impenetrable as the question. Freddy sucked in air and heaved a sigh. He cast a glance back at Hardigan. The big man wasn't watching. He had his gun holstered and was surveying the wounded, attending to their needs as best he could. He grabbed first aid kits, likely from every nearby room in the station, and was patching up the whimpering, bleeding remains of the firefight. Freddy suspected that while he wasn't watching, Hardigan still paid attention. He was listening and taking note of everything that the man was saying. Still, Freddy also suspected that, when inevitably asked, Hardigan would want to deny witnessing anything that Freddy had done. It wasn't exactly like he'd been given carte blanche, but Hardigan had deferred to Freddy's wisdom. Or rather, he had deferred to wartime Freddy's wisdom. Wartime Freddy returned his gaze to the man in front of him and heaved a sigh. He was barely a man, to tell the truth. He was young, maybe 18 or 19, and had light brown stubble growing in thick shadows along his cheek and jaw. Freddy noticed that all of the men from the Raiders' crew had beards in some stage of growth. He remembered the big man who'd escaped looked like Blackbeard with a shaved head. The young man must be new to the cult. Slowly, Freddy pulled the hammer back on his gun to uncock it. Softly, like speaking to an infant, he said, "I could have shot you, you know." The young man nodded. "I wanted to shoot you. You owe me." Again, the man nodded. "Come on, let's go." He pulled the cultist to his feet by the scruff of his collar and jabbed the gun barrel into his side. "If you pull any bullshit, or if I even think you're gonna pull any bullshit, I'll fuck you up so bad that they'll skip the viewing and your mama will beg for a closed casket." They left out of the same door that the Raiders had, and Freddy led the way. The young cultist seemed reluctant, but conceited. Behind them, Hardigan tended to the dead.
Johnny, December 15th, 2024.
The building stared out at roadside onlookers with dark, empty window frames, like the bleak expression of a doomed man. Inside, its belly was a wide open space, broken only by thick, round support pillars made of aged concrete and decorated with fat, neon worms of vulgar graffiti. On the porous, concrete floor spread an old, red spatter stain. Otherwise, the place was filthy and barren. Having already heard of Bartu's physical state, Cosmo had arranged for gasoline generators to be brought in. A facsimile of a hospital room was arranged at the center of the derelict space, marked by 4 spotlights placed around the red stain. During the whole trip through the warehouse, Bartu's hospital bed jostled and bucked like an irritated calf as Johnny pushed it over dirt and scattered debris strewn across the expanse. With a grin, Johnny cast a glance behind him and announced, "Good news! I think he's waking up, Doc." Lucardo pushed Dr. Murphy forward. The night had brought harsh air with it, and the wind that whipped around the warehouse whined and bit the flesh straight to the marrow. Patches of ice had formed on the ground in places. By comparison, the area beneath the spotlights was fairly warm. Bartu shifted in his bed. Johnny grinned again. "Good morning, sunshine. Welcome back to the land of the living." On the bed, Bartu's eyes fluttered open. His brow furrowed in abject confusion, and he winced when he whipped his head around to get a grip on his surroundings. His bulging eyes widened furiously in his skull, and the bright light made them water. His nostrils flared, opening and closing like gills.
"It's a waste of time, I'm telling you," Dr. Murphy murmured. He can't talk."
Johnny shook his head at Dr. Murphy and returned his attention to Bartu. "Don't listen to that guy, Sunshine. He doesn't know what he's talking about. You and me, we're going to have a little talk. I'm going to ask you some questions, all right?" He patted Bartu on the cheek. Bartu groaned. That brightened Johnny's day. His face lit up, and he turned to the doctor with his hands out to his sides, and his grin spread wide across his face. "Holy fucking shit, Doc. It's a Christmas fucking miracle. Do you hear that?" I touched the motherfucker and he groaned. I'm like, Jesus, I guess he can fucking talk after all. Cosmo chimed in. "Who needs modern medicine when you got magic hands?" "Yeah, ladies and cripples love my magic hands. Hallelujah. Fucking men." Bartu was close to hyperventilating now. Lucardo strapped him to the bed. Bartu flailed against the big man's grip, but could only manage so much. The fight was instinctive, but that instinct was losing out to despair. The man knew his fate, or at least suspected it. With a smile, Johnny said, "Let's start this nice and easy. Slow and steady wins the race, am I right?" He pointed at a canvas duffel bag at the base of one of the nearby pillars. "Doc, do me a favor and pass me over that bag, will you?" Murphy's gaze flickered between Johnny and the bag. His face betrayed the complex conflict squirming in his heart.
I don't..."
Lucardo wasted no time. He lunged at the doctor like a striking snake, his fist rocketing out into the man's jaw. The loud crack echoed in the desolate space. Murphy spun and collapsed to the ground on his face. The golem loomed above him, cracked his knuckles, and hoisted the doctor back to his feet by his lab coat's lapels. Johnny's smile grew even wider. "Doc, you seem to be under the impression that you have a lot of options here. Let me fill you in on a secret. You don't. You're my dog. Got it?" Although he grinned, Johnny's eyes betrayed a mad darkness. Murphy's turmoil made him falter. Johnny didn't like the hesitation. With Lucardo holding him, he punched the doctor once, twice, 3 times until Murphy's nose flattened beneath his fist. Burbling, pathetic wails roiled from Murphy's throat. Johnny lightly slapped the wounds on Murphy's face and squeezed his cheeks together, dragging the doctor's eyes to meet his own. "Bark for me," Johnny said. Confusion wreathed Murphy's face. Johnny pinched his broken nose between his knuckles and twisted. Murphy screamed. "Lucardo, does that sound like a fucking bark to you?" The golem shook his head with slow, curt movements. Johnny nodded. "See, I didn't think so either. Let's try that again." He released Murphy's nose and slapped him again. "Bark like a fucking bitch in heat." In a broken stammer, Murphy yipped a few times, scanning his audience for approval. Johnny and Cosmo laughed.
"He sounds like a fucking chihuahua."
Johnny pointed at him and snapped his fingers. That's it, like a fucking chihuahua." He shifted his attention back to Murphy. "Are you my little chihuahua bitch?" Murphy's lips twitched, but he nodded. The cruel grin spread over Johnny's face like warm butter. Good girl. He pointed at the bag again. Now, go get me that bag, bitch. He let go of the doctor with a shove, and Murphy fell to the ground again. He scrambled to his feet and raced for the duffel, heaving the heavy bag with both hands and stumbling back to Johnny and Lucardo in the gurney. Johnny patted his head. That's a good little bitch. He gestured to Lucardo. Age before beauty. With the patient speed of experienced professionalism, Lucardo bent over the bag, opened it, and rummaged around until he extracted a pair of pliers. Nice call. Fingernails? Lucardo shook his head. He bared his teeth and tapped one with the pliers. Oof, that's gonna be messy. Johnny extracted a first aid kit from the duffel and tossed it to Murphy. Keep him alive, Doc. Horrified, the doctor gaped at the first aid kit in his trembling hands. Johnny turned to Bartu and grabbed him by the beard. Where the fuck do your friends live? Bartu spat in his face. Lucardo lurched forward, but Johnny held out a hand. No, this one's on me. He reached into the bag and extracted an old, weathered Louisville Slugger. It was stained red and pink, just like he'd told Deborah. Johnny navigated to Bartu's good leg. He ran a hand over the ankle and the shin, almost as if he were petting it. It's gonna be hard to walk, Bart. He raised the bat high above his head and slammed it down on the tender ankle. Bartu screamed. Johnny struck again. Bartu screamed louder. Johnny struck one more time, and the sawtooth white of Bartu's shin protruded from the jagged red tear in his flesh. The foot dangled limply, held to the hole by tendon alone. Bartu's weeping filled the building's empty space like water in a cup. Johnny rested the baseball bat across his shoulders and played with the dangling foot, patting it to make it dance. He tapped his shoulder with the bat and then asked, Where are your friends? Murphy fumbled to open the first aid kit, but it fell, and the contents spilled onto the filthy floor. He dropped to his knees and scrambled to pick them up, and Johnny ignored him. Through gritted teeth, Bartu growled, You think pain will make me talk? Johnny patted his shin. Yeah, it usually does. Bartu sucked in a haggard breath. I've been trained to withstand any pain. I am more man than you can even comprehend. That sounds great. We're gonna have a lot of fun tonight, then. Johnny snapped his fingers. Lucardo, the teeth. Lucardo took off his coat, unbuttoned the sleeves of his white dress shirt, and rolled them up to his elbows. He grabbed Bartu's forehead and pushed him down onto the gurney. Johnny searched the duffel bag until he found a ball joint spreader. He and Lucardo forced Bartu's mouth open. Then Johnny slipped the spreader inside. Bartu's tongue pushed and probed the metal, but his futile attempts to dislodge the tool were met with chuckles. Once the spreader was in place, Bartu's mouth stretched open as far as it could go. His tongue still sought purchase on the spreader, and he tried to dislodge it by shaking his head. Johnny held him steady by the ears, pressing his hands into the sides of his head. Focus set into Lucardo's dark, impassive eyes. His expression betrayed no malice or joy as he brought the pliers to Bartu's teeth. When the metal clamped down on the left front tooth and Bartu roared a panicked, formless vowel, Lucardo didn't smirk. He applied pressure, and with a quick flick of his wrist, blood gushed from the cultist's gums and into his mouth. Bartu gargled it as he screamed, coughing spurts of it up and onto Lucardo's wrist. The golem didn't flinch. He didn't curse or recoil. He simply moved on to the next tooth.
Holy fucking shit, that's gotta hurt like a motherfucker!
Meanwhile, Dr. Murphy turned away from the violence and his vomit splattered onto the concrete floor with a loud, wet slap. The sour stink of acid and half-digested dinner swelled. Heat rose from the puddle in tongues of steam.
Whoa!
Cosmo chastised.
Jesus fucking Christ, Murph! Get a fucking hold of yourself!
Lucardo broke off the third tooth, and it was unclear whether it was intentional or a messy accident. Johnny imagined Lucardo didn't make mistakes. Anyway, the fourth tooth was a cleaner pull. Lucardo had to lean away from Bartu's mouth and pull with both hands to yank it out. It slid out, the pale roots emerging from the red-stained gums like fingers releasing a death grip. The longest root seemed to go on forever, emerging inch by bloody inch with wet sucking sounds until finally the entire yellowed mass came free with a soft pop, trailing stringy bits of tissue. After extracting each tooth, Lucardo put it in the palm of his free hand. He had a handsome collection now. He jostled the teeth in his hand by bobbing them up and down, then selecting one, holding it up to the light as if he were inspecting specimens. He moved on to the fifth tooth. Bartu's eyes pleaded with Johnny as he thrashed about on the gurney. Cosmo stood at his feet and held the gurney stable. Bartu's scream had the jagged edges of torn paper. Johnny winked at Bartu. "Are we having fun yet?" Tears mixed with the blood spattered on Bartu's cheeks, trailing pink streaks disappearing into the concrete beneath him.
What do you say, Lucardo? You think he'll talk now?
Lucardo shrugged. He tossed the pliers onto Bartu's chest and retrieved a handkerchief from his back pocket, wiping his hands, wrists, and forearms off with it. He wiped the teeth and slipped them into his pocket. Johnny frowned and nodded his head, slinging his gaze at Cosmo.
What about you?
Cosmo looked a little green, but he kept his voice and expression steady.
I think it's gonna be pretty fucking hard for him to talk with all them missing teeth.
Johnny tutted and shook his head.
You're just like the doc over here. You don't have any faith in your buddy Bart over here.
He patted Bartu's cheek and then unscrewed the spreader.
What do you say, Bart? Do you think you can sing for me?
Bartu spat a fat blob of blood onto his face. Johnny clenched his teeth and squeezed his eyes tightly shut. The muscles in his jaws tightened like a fist, and his teeth groaned. He extended a hand to Lucardo, who needed no instruction to pass him the handkerchief. Johnny wiped the blood off and the spit, then tongued his cheek while nodding. He picked up the bat again. This time he didn't aim for a healthy limb. He slammed the slugger against the other leg. A crooked crack snapped the cast open at the thigh, sending dust and debris into the air. Johnny and Lucardo coughed against the dust. Bartu wailed.
I think you hit the broken spot, kid,
Cosmo remarked.
Yeah, I think you're right,
Johnny replied. He slammed the bat into the broken leg again. The force splintered the plaster, and the cast hung loosely from Bartu's knee. Without the cast's support, the fractured limb dangled powerlessly from the middle of Bartu's thigh, flopping at the knee like a wet noodle. Without the spreader in his mouth, Bartu's scream was full, tapered, and complete. Johnny rested the bat on his shoulder again. He leaned in close to Bartu's ear and said, "Where do the other freaks live, Bart?" Bartu took a few haggard breaths before he licked his lips and, in broken speech, burbled, "I'll never give up my brothers." Johnny's face twisted into an expression of incredulous confusion.
I can't understand a fucking word this guy says, can you?
He met Lucardo's eyes, and the golem gave his head a slow shake. Johnny looked at Cosmo, who merely shrugged and frowned, raising his eyebrows. Johnny bobbed his head with the short, quick motions of a bird.
I guess he likes fucking with me. We must have a fucking masochist on our hands, huh?
Johnny rifled through the duffel bag, searching for a box of salt and a large sheathed knife. He tossed the sheath back into the bag and approached the broken leg.
I have to admit something, guys.
"What's that?" Cosmo asked. Johnny imagined he was on stage. Open mic. Comedy club. Time for his bit.
I was an angry kid growing up. No shit! Here I thought you lived a charmed fucking life.
Johnny nodded.
It's true, I was. One of the ways I got it out was by carving heinous shit into bathroom walls.
You one of those shitbags?
Yeah. I'm reformed now. I'm a good boy. But every so often, I get the urge again.
Well, I think you got the perfect canvas right here, kid.
Johnny tucked the salt under his arm and slapped his forehead like the thought had never occurred to him. What a fucking genius idea, Cos. Here, hold this. He passed Cosmo the box of salt and then put a hand on Bartu's thigh. With the other hand, he brought the edge of the knife to the cultist's flesh. I'll start with a classic, he said as dark red blood oozed from the gash beneath the blade. Johnny was here. You gotta spell it W-U-Z if you want it to be a classic. You're right, Cos, as always. Johnny was here. Bartu gasped at the pain. He didn't have the strength to scream. Johnny went slow with every letter. I could never get curves right, so it looks all angular and shit. Like Viking letters? Yeah, like from that one show. Which one? The one about fucking Vikings, Cos. It's literally called Vikings. Cosmo waved his hand like he was clearing the air. I don't know what you're talking about, kid. Johnny got to the U in was. You should watch it. It's fucking badass, and the broads ain't bad looking either. Johnny, if I wanted to look at broads, I'd go to Rolling Hills and watch My Own Girls. Johnny bobbed his head. He was on the first E. That's a fair point. Bartu's hands opened and clenched, opened and clenched, opened and clenched, and he moaned harsh, sibilant hisses. His eyes bulged, and his skull and the lines of his face twisted into knots. Johnny stepped back and admired his work. What do you guys think? Pretty good for my first time. He'd made the cuts deep and wide, carving out 1/8-inch lines. Johnny was here. He punctuated the statement with a crude smiley face. Lucardo looked but didn't respond. Cosmo nodded with an approving frown. That little face at the end is pretty good. Overall, I'd say 10 out of 10. I think it's your masterpiece, Johnny. Johnny grinned like a naughty schoolboy. Not yet, it's not. He beckoned with his hand. Give me the fucking salt. Cosmo obliged, and Johnny overturned the box, spilling a thick stream of salt over the bloody words. The hiss of crystals rushing out of the box was overwhelmed by Bartu's rediscovered voice. His cries were broken, pathetic, and hoarse. Johnny rubbed the salt into the wounds and slapped at the words with an open palm. The salt dug into the wound, clumping with the blood oozing from the cuts.
Bartu moaned something semi-coherent. Johnny stopped.
What's that? I wasn't paying attention. I'd given up on you and was just enjoying myself.
Bartu's slack, tear-streaked face flopped lethargically from side to side.
Pine!
He moaned.
Pine Street!
Cosmo snapped his fingers.
I think the creep just said Pine Street, Johnny.
Bartu nodded furiously, gasping for breath. An explosive, authentic smile dimpled Johnny's face.
Good job. Great job, Bart. I'm so proud of you. Now, keep going. What about Pine Street?
Well, Pine Street!
Keep going. I need more than that. Pine Street's a long-ass road.
3918 Pine Street!
Johnny patted Bartu on the cheek, causing him to wince.
Fantastic. That's great. 3918 Pine Street?
Bartu nodded. Johnny extended his arms wide, still clutching the bloodied knife.
Great.
He turned to Cosmo.
You gonna call some boys to case the place?
Cosmo nodded.
We can knock it over tomorrow morning.
Fuck yeah, we can,
Johnny said. He twirled the knife in his hand and turned back to Bartu.
How well you think I can carve a picture on this piece of shit?
Deborah, December 15th, 2024.
She was a rag doll. A sudden, blunt blow against her temple had ripped the fabric of her consciousness, but it had not torn it entirely. Instead of nothingness, there was a heavy sensation of being carried, her body slung over a shoulder, the rhythmic pounding of footsteps echoing through her skull. Voices filtered in and out, the words muffled and meaningless like static on a long-lost radio station. Then there was the desert. Not the hot, rancid breath of a wild dog, but the heavy, oppressive heat of the sun against her skin. She found herself standing, but her body felt strangely light, each step covering impossible distances with a single bound. The air shimmered, and the endless loping hills of dry dunes rose and fell with hypnotic consistency. She was a soldier, but not in her fatigues. Instead, her body was swaddled in airy, spacious pants and a thin white material that wrapped loosely around her head. Across her chest was not a bulletproof vest, but a dense, heavy set of lamellar armor. Its individual scales painted the darkest, deepest black she had ever seen. The armor absorbed all light, a void of color that felt as heavy and cold as coffin nails. In the distance, the desert floor trembled, and a sound like a low, guttural wail echoed from the horizon. The sound grew sharper, louder, and as she moved toward it, she saw a battle unfolding on the dunes. Men in ancient, flowing robes fought with swords and bows against men in modern, sand-colored fatigues, their Kalashnikovs spitting fire. Then from the sky a new vision descended. Lucinda Love, naked except for thin, bloody strips of cloth that wrapped around her like shrouds. Her eyes, which should have been glazed and dead, now burned with the light of a funeral pyre, and her mouth
twisted with grotesque fury, screamed a silent scream that shattered the desert air, freezing the fighters in place. Lucinda raised a hand toward Deborah, her face a perfect mask of hatred and anguish. Deborah awoke to the high, nagging drone of an errant light bulb. It took her a moment, but a chill like ice water soaked her spine when she realized that she was looking out from behind bars. On the other side of them were dark cinder block walls and more cages. They lined up across the long space in 2 rows. The light from the bulb, flat, ugly, and yellow, splashed across a skeletal wooden staircase and bled onto the gray, washed-out floor of the basement. Movement, like shifting weight, caused the bars to creak and rattle. Deborah tried to ignore it. She did not trust herself not to panic if she allowed herself to think about it. But they were everywhere, whimpering and whispering, and some of them crying very, very softly. There were women inside the cages. She tightened her resolve and put the guards of her mental fortresses on the highest alert, hardening her heart as she had once read God had hardened Pharaoh's, and she closed her eyes. She took a moment for herself. Deborah only had a few options. Either she could wait and see what would happen, she could talk with some of the women, or she could try to escape now. She could come back for the women, or she could release them as she had escaped herself. Her brain buzzed with the calculus of pros, cons, and the shared weight between them. Time passed at a crawl as she decided. It slithered by and watched the women in their cages. Deborah felt its eyes on her neck, its weight on her shoulders as it lay languidly across them. One of the women spoke with her. When Deborah asked her name, she said it started with either a V or a D, but she couldn't remember. She explained that this was called Fajan.
They're breaking us. You've broken most of us. What about you, DV? Are you broken yet?
The woman closed her eyes and pressed her forehead against the wire bars.
I don't know. Maybe I was always broken.
Then she curled into a ball like a house cat and seemed to go to sleep. Deborah couldn't spend the time like that. She refused to spend her time simply waiting. Opportunity comes to those who seek it. It does not knock. The cages didn't seem particularly sturdy, being hardly more than thin-barred kennels for dogs. The implication lit a nauseous fire in Deborah's gut. She swallowed, gritted her teeth, and muscled past the notion. On the door of each cage was a padlock, linking opposite ends of a thick chain to the bars of the door. Beyond that, however, there didn't seem to be much to keep the women locked inside. Deborah suspected that the true locks chained their minds. The fact that the raiders called this process Fajan was important. She knew little about the details, but she'd known a Pakistani man during the war who'd worked with Indian elephant trainers. Elephants, he explained, are kept in place with rope tied to a stake hammered in the ground. So brutalized are the elephants that they believe the stake can keep them despite their strength. The true power of the Mahouts comes from their control over an elephant's mind.
Deborah pressed against the bars of the cage. Could it really be that simple? She peered at the other women held captive in the basement. All bore weary expressions. All harbored the weight of defeat on their backs. Perhaps, Deborah thought. Perhaps. The door to the basement creaked open and the stairs groaned under the weight of the descending raider. In their cages, the women stirred to waking consciousness or scrambled, some of them moving toward the man as he appeared at the front of the stairs, while others still moved away, retreating as far back in their prisons as they could. Deborah recognized the man by his frame. She didn't think she'd ever seen a man so large before, and when seen on a television screen, it was easy to assume it was a trick of the angle. It was not. Throughout the basement, there was a palpable shift as noticeable as a sudden drop in air pressure. A mix of fear, hate, and admiration seasoned the air. Deborah hadn't experienced anything like it. The women bristled, some averted their gaze, others held their breath, still more watched, prostrate in their tiny prisons as the enormous man made his way across the basement floor. By the crackle in the air, Deborah judged that most of the women weren't even aware of their reaction to him. It was visceral, emerging from deep inside them. More and more, Deborah was certain about her theory behind the cages. They were merely pegs in the dirt, and the women mighty elephants all. The big man came to her cage and knelt before it. His eyes took Deborah aback. They gleamed with an intelligence she hadn't expected from such a barbarian. She'd anticipated muscle, testosterone, and brute force, but his eyes were green, not red or black like those that glared from her mental caricatures. He was clean, too, and his long, heavy beard was combed, and his head had been recently shaved. Deborah hadn't expected the monster to look so human. He watched her without a word, as if she were a girl in amber or a butterfly under glass, and most bizarre of all, Deborah felt as if she were truly being seen. It bothered her more than she thought a man's gaze was capable of. What was more, he didn't inspect her as if she were prey. He watched her as a human being, perhaps even as an equal. Most unsettling was the cold, reptilian intelligence which did not flicker. The man saw her, and he was unimpressed.
You're the detective who's been looking for me.
It was neither a question seeking confirmation or a statement of fact. He processed the information. Putting a hand to his chest, he said,
I am Temujin. This is my home.
Deborah didn't speak. She kept her gaze with his, unwilling to avert it like the other women. She didn't know what to say. Surely there was something brave and witty she could spit at him, something about justice and freedom or human dignity that would stir the women around her into a fury of revolution, but there was nothing. Deborah glared back at the man who called himself Temujin and silently snarled. It was defiance enough. Temujin rose, towering above Deborah in her cage, looking down upon her with his fists and jaw clenched, set tight in their state of perpetual cold fury. His gaze shifted from her to the woman on her right, the path of it almost a physical thing, sweeping across the space like a shifting beam of a spotlight. From the girl, there came a small, pathetic sound somewhere between a shriek and a whimper, and she dropped her eyes to ragged fingernails digging into the filthy blanket beneath her. The woman cowered in her cage, covering the back of her head with quivering hands. On Deborah's left, DV sneered, "Why the fuck don't you just leave her alone?" A collective gasp rippled through the basement as the women all stirred in their cages to observe the scene. The spotlight of Temujin's gaze moved again, this time landing on DV, and he raised his chin to glare down his nose at her.
"I see I haven't properly dealt with you," he growled. "Clearly, I've neglected you."
Other men came down the stairs. No one spoke. The men gathered around their leader in silence, perhaps waiting for orders or perhaps too afraid to opine. At last, Temujin broke his contest with Vicky and made his move. He didn't say a word. Perhaps because he didn't need to, as he opened DV's cage and dragged her out by the throat. She wriggled and screamed, clawing at him and kicking wildly with emaciated legs. One man pulled DV's right arm while another took her left, and they held her still, her naked back stretched tight like a canvas for Temujin. He grabbed something from the metal rolling table. Deborah heard the whip before she saw it. Its long snake-like tongue sliced through DV's back like a razor blade, painting a weeping red streak across the girl's smooth white skin. It snickered and snarled once, twice, thrice, each time a puckered red graze manifested as spontaneously as magic. Every hyena bark crack of the leather tongue overshadowed the girl's loud, low wails. Deborah had heard many different sounds of pain. Some of them haunted her still, while others she didn't believe were possible. But the sounds DV made outdid all others that had come before. The sound made her lose count of the lashings. The wet red streaks across her back blended together like cross-hash shading, making it impossible to count them. "Stop!" Temujin's hand halted just before flinging his whip. The green eyes flashed, and his upper lip curled into an upward snarl. He turned slowly away from DV's wet red back and scanned the women.
"Who dares? Who dares interrupt me?"
No one spoke, but the women's eyes betrayed the trembling woman to Deborah's right. He raised his arms wide as if mocking DV's position as he addressed the woman in the basement.
"You need to remember, all of you, who I am and what you are. You belong to us, which in turn means you belong to me. You are all mine." He walked back to the metal wheel table again and deposited the whip as he continued, gesticulating with broad, quick motions. "You are here because we have taken you, and everything that belongs to these men belongs to me!" There was showmanship that inclined Deborah to believe he wasn't speaking for the women's sake. He was peacocking,
telegraphing messages for the men of his little club, not ensuring these starving, dirty women knew who was on top. Temujin grabbed a pipe wrench from the table and confirmed Deborah's suspicions. He stomped over to the woman in the remaining occupied cage beside Deborah, unlocking it with a smooth motion. Deborah noticed this. The locks must not be strong. He yanked the woman out of her cage. She did not fight as hard as Dee Dee had, who the men dragged back to her cage and flung her limp body inside. She must have passed out from the pain. The other woman wept and shook her head, holding Temujin's hand as it clamped down on her cheeks. He hoisted her into the air and raised the pipe wrench.
I am Temujin, and I may disgorge you when I please.
The heavy, metal-marred pipe wrench collided with the soft tissue of her flank first, below the ribs. It burst the skin and knocked the wind out of the woman, who coughed and sputtered. Temujin tossed her onto the floor on her back, then extended a hand to his audience.
Bring me the frame,
he said. An older man with a shaved head darted into another room in the basement, returning with something long, flat, and thin, and metal. Once he set it up, it was apparent what it was. A bed frame. Temujin pointed the wrench at the still sputtering woman, and two more young men lunged forward with ropes. Deborah covered her mouth as the realization sank into her gut. The sick fucks had made a makeshift Catherine wheel. Once the woman was strung up onto the bed frame, all four limbs securely tied, Temujin raised the wrench high above his head. The woman hung her head back and screamed. The line of her left forearm bent as if she had a second elbow. White bone peeked out from the torn red flesh. Right forearm. More screams. Left bicep. The screams faded into static in Deborah's mind as she watched the horror transfixed. It continued, each limb segment broken with a single, brutal swing of the heavy wrench. Blood spattered over the cages behind the woman on the bed frame, bespeckling the occupants within while they shrieked. Below her stretched a ragged, expanding pool of blood. Every blow made it sound less and less real. Around the room, Deborah was certain that for at least a stolen moment, some of the men bore the same disgust she harbored. Some of them couldn't even watch. Temujin seemed to take note. He flung the wrench forward like an accusatory finger, spattering some of the men with the woman's blood.
There are those who think me an unworthy leader, but I am still here to take my place. I'll kill all of you if I have to. Spinning slowly, he raised his face to the ceiling and gestured at everything and roared, "This is my house, these are my prizes, and you are my men!"
Temujin struck the limbs until they broke off completely. The screaming torso thudded to the floor with its gnarled red stubs flailing. He stepped through the bed frame where her limbs dangled and raised the wrench high above his head once more. With a blood-curdling roar, he sank the wrench into her face where it split the skull like a melon. It stopped the screaming, but it stuck in the flesh when he tried to yank it free. He had to leverage his foot against the dead woman's throat to get back the wrench.
With the dripping tool, he spun toward Deborah and thundered toward her. He smashed the lock with the wrench and hauled her out of the cage. Deborah was so surprised that she didn't fight back as he grabbed the back of her neck and hoisted her off the ground. It only took a few moments before her instincts revved to life, and she kicked the air, flinging her bare feet backward to slam against Temujin's chest. Her nails dug into his hands and fingers, and she flailed her face, snapping her jaws like a jackal in search of whatever purchase they could land. It was now her turn to make sounds which may not have been human, but the pounding river of her heart crashing through her ears drowned them out. It wasn't fear that pumped blood and adrenaline through her veins. Deborah knew fear very well. She had knelt in foxholes with corpses and screams, with madmen lobbing explosives at her, and she had felt very afraid of them. Deborah was not afraid of the man who called himself Temujin. She held only hate and rage for him, intertwined together like a red-hot iron caduceus in her heart. He ignored her and spoke to his audience.
We have one of theirs. Victory is in our grasp. I will kill all who stand against me, all who defy me. I am Temujin, and this is my house.
The speech was met with thunderous applause and mindless jabber. Deborah rolled her eyes. The man was delusional. He'd watched too much Spartacus and read too many samurai novels. His expression was saturated in hollow glory, swollen with ego. He was distracted, so Deborah struck. She clutched his forearm behind her head, swung her body backwards while wrapping her heels around his biceps and sliding her grip to the underside of his wrist. She pushed up against the wrist and down against the bicep, and the unprepared Temujin's hand loosened with surprise. Deborah landed on the floor with her feet and hands pressed to the concrete, her face a mask of feral danger that dared the others to come for her. One of them reached. Deborah lunged. The man screamed. Her teeth sank into his arms. Her eyes went wide and white, and she kept her jaw tight, bite firm, so that when he jerked his arm around to free himself, he did more damage than she possibly could. The blood oozed and sometimes squirted. It coated Deborah's face and dripped down her front, covering his arms and spattering onto the floor. He didn't stop screaming. An eerie sensation swept the room. Every atom stood perfectly still. Every breath was held in frightened, perhaps for some aroused anticipation of how the scene might unfold. It was as if every sound in the world had ceased. Every sound except for the man's screams. Deborah had sworn that there'd been an echo in the basement before, but now the sound seemed to collide against the walls, floor, and ceiling with a wet, flaccid slap. The scream and the moment dragged on. They dragged on for a long time. The man shook Deborah so hard that the flesh peeled off the bone. Deborah chomped down harder. She was close to ripping off a chunk of the muscle. Temujin, who had disappeared from the crowd, emerged from the mass of sweat with an eyebrow cocked over furious green orbs, and he put the barrel of a pistol to the screaming man's head. The screaming stopped. All the air rushed out of the room. A moment passed, and then another, and then every set of lungs seemed to release a sigh at the same time. For the first time, Deborah realized that she'd been screaming too. Low, guttural sobs like the grunts of a wild hog, muffled by the gag of human flesh. She sucked in mouthfuls of iron air and didn't realize she hadn't released hold of her jaw until she choked on blood. The limp limb dropped out of her mouth. She lingered over the corpse, eyes still wide, mouth still agape, her curled back heaving up and down with the pace of her heavy, heaving breath. No one approached her. No one dared. Except for Temujin. She was like a misbehaving pet. He gripped Deborah by the scruff of her neck. She squirmed against the hold, thrashing and flailing and bellowing out high-pitched feral shrieks. It was effortless. Her minor rebellion had cost her in energy, and she was spent. The little resistance Deborah was able to put up now, while spirited and genuine, was paltry. Deborah had directed her energy against the wrong target. Temujin tossed her into the open cage and slammed the door shut, latching it with an aloof irritation just before Deborah railed against it with another set of shrieks.
Animals,
He muttered, mostly to himself.
We're all simply animals.
Thank you for sharing my nightmares and helping me carry the grief. If this episode left a mark, do me a favor. Pass it along to someone who deserves to lose a little sleep. Subscribe, leave a comment, tell me what's keeping you up. You can support the show on Patreon for early episodes and a look at what goes into building these nightmares. My books are on Amazon. Links are below. Thank you for sharing this time with me. Good night.